In the shadowed corridors of the Palazzo Vecchio, where Florence's most dangerous minds once plotted the fate of kingdoms, a single truth echoed through the marble halls: confidence is not merely a trait, it is a weapon. Those who master it become untouchable. Those who fail to understand its depth remain forever at the mercy of stronger wills. The year was 1513, and Niccolò Machiavelli sat in his study, candlelight dancing across pages that would later reshape how power is understood. But his greatest insights were not about ruling others, they were about ruling oneself. For Machiavelli understood what modern men have forgotten: true confidence is not the loud bravado of the insecure, but the quiet certainty of a man who has destroyed every weak part of himself and emerged as something far more dangerous. This is not a tale of mere self-improvement. This is the blueprint for psychological warfare against your own limitations, a manual for building the kind of unshakable confidence that makes others step back in recognition of something they cannot quite name but instinctively respect. It is the confidence that comes not from success, but from the willingness to face complete failure without flinching. Not from strength, but from having descended into weakness and emerged transformed. Part 1: The Forge of Destruction. The first lesson Machiavelli learned in the political cauldron of Renaissance Italy was that every man carries within himself a collection of weaknesses that will eventually destroy him unless he destroys them first. The weak man hopes his flaws will remain hidden. The strong man exposes them to brutal examination and burns them away like a blacksmith purifies gold. In the streets of Florence, young merchants would approach the great banking houses with trembling hands, their voices cracking as they pitched their ventures. They failed not because their ideas lacked merit, but because their confidence was built on hope rather than preparation, on wishful thinking rather than cold assessment of reality. They had never faced their own inadequacy and, therefore, remained enslaved to it. The Medici family understood this principle intuitively. Lorenzo de' Medici did not become the magnificent by avoiding difficult truths about himself. He spent years deliberately seeking situations where he would be challenged, where his assumptions would be tested, where his weaknesses would be exposed. He surrounded himself with men who would tell him harsh truths, who would push back against his ideas, who would force him to defend his positions with logic rather than authority. This is the first pillar of Machiavellian confidence: the willingness to seek out and destroy your own illusions before the world does it for you. Most men live in carefully constructed bubbles of self-deception. They surround themselves with people who affirm their beliefs, avoid situations that might challenge their self-image, and interpret every setback as either bad luck or someone else's fault. This is not confidence, this is fragility disguised as strength. True confidence begins with what Machiavelli called the dark examination, a process of ruthlessly cataloging every fear, every weakness, every insecurity that drives your behavior. This is not the gentle self-reflection recommended by modern self-help gurus. This is surgical precision applied to your own psychology. You must identify not just what you fear, but why you fear it, how that fear manifests in your behavior, and what it costs you in terms of power and influence. The process is deliberately uncomfortable. When Cesare Borgia prepared to conquer the Romagna, he did not begin by gathering armies. He began by examining every possible way he could fail. He studied his own tendency toward impatience, his need for approval from his father, his weakness for beautiful women who might compromise his judgment. He mapped these vulnerabilities like a general mapping enemy fortifications, not to indulge in self-pity, but to systematically eliminate each one. Consider the modern businessman who trembles before important presentations. The weak approach is to practice his speech and hope for the best. The Machiavellian approach is to deliberately seek out the most hostile audiences, the most challenging questions, the most embarrassing possible scenarios. He practices not just success, but failure. He becomes so familiar with his own fear that it no longer has power over him. This process requires what Renaissance philosophers called sprezzatura, the art of making the difficult appear effortless. But true sprezzatura is not achieved by natural talent. It is achieved by such thorough preparation that you have considered and practiced for every possible contingency. The confident man appears unflappable not because he never faces challenges, but because he has already faced every challenge in his mind and prepared his response. The destruction of weakness is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice, a constant vigilance against the creeping return of old patterns. Machiavelli himself practiced this discipline ruthlessly. Even in exile, even when his political career seemed finished, he continued to study, to write, to challenge his own assumptions. He transformed his greatest failure, the fall of the Florentine Republic, into his greatest strength by examining it so thoroughly that he emerged with insights no other political theorist possessed. This is where most men fail in their pursuit of confidence. They want the result without the process. They want to feel strong without doing the work of eliminating weakness. They want others to respect them without having done anything worthy of respect. This is not confidence, this is delusion, and delusion, no matter how convincing to its possessor, is always transparent to others. The man who destroys his weak self understands that confidence is not a feeling, it is a capability. It is the capability to face any situation without flinching because you have already faced worse in your own mind. It is the capability to speak truth in any room because you have already spoken harder truths to yourself. It is the capability to stand alone if necessary because you have already proven to yourself that your own company is sufficient. This capability cannot be faked or mimicked. It shows itself in 1,000 small ways: the steadiness of your voice when others raise theirs in anger, the calmness of your demeanor when others panic, the clarity of your thinking when others are clouded by emotion. These are not performance techniques, they are the natural byproducts of having done the deep work of self-mastery. When Lorenzo de' Medici walked into a room of hostile nobles, they felt something they could not articulate but could not ignore. It was not arrogance or aggression. It was the quiet certainty of a man who had looked into his own soul and found it adequate to any challenge. This is the confidence that scares people, not because it threatens them directly, but because it reveals the hollowness of their own posturing. The weak man seeks to build confidence by accumulating external validation, success, wealth, approval from others. But these are sand foundations that shift with every wind. The strong man builds confidence by eliminating his need for external validation entirely. He becomes a closed system, generating his own sense of worth from his own standards, his own principles, his own judgment. This is perhaps the most difficult aspect of the process to understand for those raised in our current culture of constant validation seeking. We are taught from childhood to measure our worth by others' reactions to us. We check social media for likes, we gauge our success by others' envy, we feel confident only when others affirm our choices. This is not strength, this is dependency disguised as success. The Machiavellian approach requires what might seem like cruelty toward oneself. You must become your own harshest critic, your own most demanding judge, your own most challenging opponent. You must set standards for yourself that are higher than any external authority would set. You must demand of yourself a level of excellence that makes others' approval irrelevant because you know whether you have truly earned it. This internal transformation creates what observers recognize as an aura of danger. Not physical danger, though that may be present, but psychological danger. The man who has mastered himself represents a threat to the comfortable illusions others maintain about their own capabilities. His very presence raises uncomfortable questions. If he can achieve this level of self-mastery, what excuse do I have for my own weakness? If he can face truth so directly, what am I hiding from? If he can stand so firmly on his own judgment, why do I need so much approval from others? This is why true confidence scares people. It forces them to confront their own compromises, their own weaknesses, their own dependencies. In the presence of genuine strength, facade strength becomes obviously inadequate. The man who has destroyed his weak self becomes a mirror that reflects others' weaknesses back to them, and most people find this deeply unsettling. But this unsettling quality is precisely what creates respect and influence. People may not always like the confident man, but they cannot ignore him. They cannot dismiss him, cannot manipulate him, cannot make him dance to their emotional rhythms. He operates by his own code, responds to his own standards, and judges by his own principles. This independence is both attractive and threatening, which creates the complex dynamic that marks true charismatic power. The process of destroying weakness requires specific techniques that go far beyond conventional self-improvement. First, you must learn to seek discomfort deliberately. Where others avoid difficult conversations, challenging situations, or uncomfortable truths, you must run toward them. This is not masochism, this is training. Every difficult situation you face voluntarily is one less situation that can catch you unprepared later. Second, you must develop what Machiavelli called the prince's memory, the ability to learn from every interaction, every failure, every success without emotional attachment to the outcome. Most people either ignore their mistakes or ruminate on them destructively. The strong man studies his mistakes with scientific detachment, extracts every lesson they contain, and, then, discards the emotional residue. Third, you must practice the art of strategic vulnerability. This seems contradictory to building confidence, but it is essential. The weak man hides his vulnerabilities out of fear, which makes him brittle. The strong man acknowledges his limitations openly but without apology, which makes him anti-fragile. When you know your weaknesses and own them completely, others cannot use them against you. Fourth, you must develop independent judgment that operates regardless of popular opinion. This requires studying not just what to think, but how to think. You must understand the principles behind good decision-making, the biases that cloud judgment, and the emotional patterns that lead to poor choices. Your confidence must be based on your ability to navigate reality accurately, not on your ability to convince yourself that reality is something other than it is. The Italian Renaissance was a time when these principles were practiced not as abstract philosophy but as practical survival skills. The political landscape was so volatile, the consequences of weakness so severe, that men either developed genuine strength or were destroyed. There was no middle ground, no participation trophy, no safe space for comfortable self-deception. This crucible forged a type of man that modern societies rarely produce, one whose confidence was earned through fire rather than awarded through participation. Modern men often mistake simulation for reality. They learn to project confidence through body language, vocal techniques, and social strategies without doing the internal work that makes confidence genuine. This produces what might be called TED Talk confidence, impressive on the surface but hollow at the core. Such men can fool casual observers but never experienced judges, and they certainly cannot fool themselves when alone with their thoughts. The difference becomes apparent under pressure. The man with simulated confidence crumbles when his techniques fail him, when the social script breaks down, when he faces something he has not practiced. The man with genuine confidence adapts fluidly because his strength comes not from memorized responses but from deep preparation and self-knowledge. This preparation extends beyond personal psychology into practical capability. Machiavelli understood that confidence without competence is delusion. The prince who feels confident about military matters but knows nothing of logistics, strategy, or weapons will not remain confident long when facing actual war. Confidence must be grounded in real ability to handle real challenges. Therefore, the destruction of weakness includes the systematic development of genuine capabilities in areas that matter to your life and goals. You cannot feel truly confident about public speaking if you have not studied rhetoric, practiced extensively, and learned to handle hostile audiences. You cannot feel confident about business negotiations if you do not understand economics, psychology, and strategy. You cannot feel confident about leadership if you have never learned to inspire others, make difficult decisions, or take responsibility for outcomes. This is where the modern self-help industry often misleads people. It promises confidence without competence, strength without struggle, mastery without apprenticeship. It encourages people to fake it till they make it without understanding that sophisticated observers can always distinguish between authentic capability and mere performance. The Machiavellian approach demands that you become genuinely formidable before expecting others to treat you as formidable. This requires what might seem like an unreasonable investment in self-development. You must read more, study harder, practice longer, and demand more of yourself than seems necessary. But this apparently excessive preparation is what creates the surplus of capability that appears to others as effortless mastery. When Cesare Borgia entered a room, experienced politicians felt immediately that they were in the presence of someone operating on a different level. This was not because he was naturally gifted, though he was intelligent, but because he had prepared more thoroughly, thought more deeply, and eliminated more weaknesses than his competitors. His confidence was not a mask he wore but a natural expression of his genuine capabilities. This level of preparation creates what psychologists call overlearning, knowing something so thoroughly that it becomes automatic even under stress. The confident man has overlearned not just specific skills but the meta-skill of learning itself. He has become comfortable with being uncomfortable, familiar with being challenged, and practiced at adapting to new situations. The destruction of weakness is ultimately about developing what might be called anti-fragility, the quality of growing stronger under stress rather than weaker. The weak man breaks under pressure because pressure exposes his inadequacies. The strong man thrives under pressure because he has already exposed and eliminated those inadequacies through deliberate practice. This anti-fragility extends to psychological resilience as well. The man who has destroyed his weak self has already faced his worst fears in controlled circumstances. He has imagined failure, practiced with rejection, and rehearsed disappointment until these experiences no longer have power to destabilize him. When real setbacks occur, he handles them with the calm competence of someone who has already survived worse in his imagination. Part 2: The Architecture of Unshakable Presence. Once a man has begun the work of destroying his weak self, he must construct something magnificent in its place. This is not about building a false persona or adopting someone else's style, it is about architecting a presence so grounded in reality that it becomes unassailable. Machiavelli understood that destruction without reconstruction leaves only emptiness, and empty men, no matter how fearless they appear, ultimately inspire nothing but contempt. The great men of the Renaissance knew that presence is not performance. When Francesco Sforza entered Milano as its new duke, he did not need to announce his authority, it emanated from every gesture, every word, every moment of silence. This was not because he was born with natural charisma, but because he had systematically constructed an identity based on principles that could not be shaken by external circumstances. The architecture of unshakable presence begins with what Machiavelli called the foundation of certainties, a core set of principles, values, and beliefs that you have tested against reality and found solid. These are not borrowed philosophies or inherited dogmas, but convictions you have earned through experience, study, and deep reflection. They form the bedrock upon which everything else is built. Most men live without such foundations. They adopt whatever beliefs are convenient, popular, or emotionally comforting without subjecting them to rigorous examination. When these untested beliefs are challenged, their entire sense of self collapses. They become defensive, aggressive, or withdrawn because they have no deeper ground to stand on. Their confidence was built on sand, and, when the tide comes in, nothing remains. The man with unshakable presence has done the difficult work of examining every belief he holds. He has asked himself, why do I believe this? What evidence supports it? How would I defend it to an intelligent opponent? What would it cost me to abandon it if proven wrong? Through this process, he separates genuine convictions from mere preferences, universal principles from cultural conditioning, and timeless wisdom from temporary fashion. Consider how Lorenzo de' Medici handled the Pazzi conspiracy, an attempt to assassinate him and destroy his family's power in Florence. In the moment of greatest crisis, when his brother lay dead beside him and assassins pursued him through the cathedral, Lorenzo did not panic or rage or despair. He moved with calculated precision because his response was grounded in principles he had already tested: that power must be defended ruthlessly, that enemies must be met with superior force, and that the appearance of strength is as important as strength itself. This level of certainty cannot be improvised in the moment. It must be cultivated through years of deliberate practice, constant testing, and continuous refinement. The man building unshakable presence must regularly examine his own behavior to ensure it aligns with his stated principles. He must seek out situations that test his convictions and be willing to refine them when experience reveals their limitations. The second element of unshakable presence is what might be called temporal sovereignty, the ability to operate on your own timeline rather than reacting to others' urgency. Weak men are always in a hurry because they are always responding to external pressures. They check their phones compulsively, interrupt conversations to answer emails, and make decisions based on whoever spoke to them last. This reactive pattern broadcasts weakness to everyone around them. The man with unshakable presence controls his own schedule, his own priorities, and his own pace. When others attempt to create artificial urgency, he responds with deliberate consideration. When they demand immediate answers, he provides thoughtful responses. When they try to rush him into decisions, he takes whatever time is necessary to decide correctly. This is not stubbornness, it is sovereignty. Machiavelli observed that the most successful princes were those who could maintain their own counsel even under extreme pressure. They understood that the man who controls the timing of decisions often controls their outcomes. By refusing to be rushed, they forced others to operate on their terms, to wait for their consideration, to respect their process. This created what appeared to be effortless authority but was actually the result of systematic resistance to external control. Modern technology has made this principle both more important and more difficult to practice. The constant connectivity of digital life creates an expectation of immediate response that can destroy presence if not carefully managed. The man seeking to build unshakable confidence must develop what might be called response discipline, the ability to receive information without feeling compelled to react immediately. This requires establishing clear boundaries about when and how you engage with external demands. It means turning off notifications, scheduling specific times for communication, and training others to respect your availability. Most importantly, it means developing internal confidence in your own judgment so that you do not need constant input from others to make decisions. The third element is what Renaissance philosophers called gravitas, a quality of seriousness and weight that makes others naturally defer to your judgment. This is not solemnity or humorlessness, but rather the sense that you understand the real stakes involved in any situation and are prepared to handle serious consequences. Men with gravitas speak less but carry more weight when they do speak. They waste no energy on trivial matters but invest fully in what truly matters. Gravitas cannot be faked because it emerges from genuine understanding of responsibility and consequence. The man who has never made decisions that affected others' lives cannot project the same weight as one who has carried real responsibility. The man who has never faced serious adversity cannot speak with the same authority as one who has been tested by genuine hardship. This creates a challenge for young men or those who have not yet faced major challenges: how to develop gravitas before experience has provided it naturally. The answer lies in deliberately seeking responsibility, voluntarily accepting consequences, and studying the examples of those who have carried weight successfully. You must apprentice yourself to serious matters and serious people until their influence shapes your character. The fourth element is strategic patience, the ability to work toward long-term goals without needing immediate validation or visible progress. Weak men need constant feedback, regular encouragement, and frequent signs that their efforts are working. This need makes them vulnerable to manipulation by anyone who can provide or withdraw such validation. The man with unshakable presence operates like compound interest, apparently small actions accumulating over time into massive results. He can work for months or years on projects that may not pay off immediately because his confidence comes from his process, not from external recognition. This patience creates a tremendous advantage because most people are unwilling to invest in anything that does not provide quick returns. Machiavelli himself demonstrated this principle during his years in exile. Banned from political life, ignored by former allies, facing financial hardship, he could have despaired or sought quick ways back into favor. Instead, he used the time to study, to write, to develop insights that would eventually make him immortal. His greatest works, The Prince, The Discourses, The Art of War, were written during this period of apparent failure but were actually the fruit of strategic patience. The fifth element is controlled intensity, the ability to bring tremendous energy and focus to bear on chosen objectives while remaining calm and collected in your daily demeanor. This is perhaps the most difficult balance to achieve because it requires both passionate commitment and emotional discipline. The man with unshakable presence appears calm on the surface but burns with intense purpose underneath. This controlled intensity manifests in several ways. First, in the quality of attention you bring to conversations and interactions. When you are present with someone, you are completely present, not checking your phone, not thinking about other things, not waiting for your turn to speak. This level of attention is so rare in modern society that it immediately sets you apart. Second, in the depth of preparation you bring to important endeavors. While others wing it or hope for the best, you research thoroughly, practice extensively, and consider multiple scenarios. This preparation allows you to remain calm under pressure while others become flustered by unexpected developments. Third, in the standards you maintain for your own performance regardless of external expectations. You demand excellence from yourself not because others require it but because you have chosen it as your personal standard. This internal drive is visible to others even when you never speak about it directly. The sixth element is what might be called philosophical immunity, resistance to the emotional manipulation, social pressure, and psychological games that others use to control behavior. The man with unshakable presence has studied human nature so thoroughly that he recognizes manipulation attempts immediately and responds to them strategically rather than emotionally. This does not mean becoming cold or calculating in all relationships. Rather, it means maintaining the ability to choose your emotional responses based on your own judgment rather than others' behavior. When someone attempts to make you angry, you remain calm. When they try to make you feel guilty, you evaluate whether their criticism has merit. When they attempt to create urgency or fear, you assess the situation objectively. This philosophical immunity is developed through study of psychology, philosophy, and human nature combined with practical experience in dealing with difficult people. You learn to recognize the patterns, how narcissists operate, how manipulators create artificial scarcity, how insecure people attempt to drag others down to their level. Once you understand these patterns, they lose their power over you. The seventh element is adaptable consistency, the ability to maintain your core principles while adapting your tactics to different situations and people. Weak consistency is rigid and brittle, breaking when circumstances change. Strong consistency is flexible and enduring, bending without breaking when faced with new challenges. This requires developing what Machiavelli called the fox and the lion, the cunning to navigate complex social situations and the strength to stand firm when principles are at stake. The man with unshakable presence knows when to compromise on tactics while never compromising on fundamental values. He can work with people he disagrees with without adopting their positions, and he can adapt his communication style without changing his core message. The eighth element is earned authority, influence that comes not from position or title but from demonstrated competence and character. This is the most powerful form of authority because it cannot be taken away by external forces. Even if you lose your job, your money, or your social position, the respect you have earned through excellence remains. Earned authority develops slowly through consistent demonstration of superior judgment, reliable performance, and principled behavior. People begin to seek your opinion not because they have to but because they have learned that your perspective is valuable. They defer to your judgment not because of your title but because experience has taught them that you usually get things right. This type of authority is particularly powerful because it attracts genuine followers rather than mere subordinates. People who follow you because they respect your competence are far more loyal and effective than those who comply only because they fear consequences. They become extensions of your capability rather than mere tools for your use. The ninth element is what might be called energetic sovereignty, control over your own energy expenditure and emotional investment. Weak men scatter their energy across dozens of trivial concerns, react emotionally to every provocation, and exhaust themselves dealing with other people's drama. Strong men conserve their energy for what matters most and refuse to be drawn into conflicts that do not serve their purposes. This requires developing a clear hierarchy of priorities and the discipline to maintain it under pressure. When someone attempts to engage you in a pointless argument, you decline politely but firmly. When others create crisis around matters that do not affect your core objectives, you remain focused on what actually matters. When people try to make their problems your emergency, you maintain appropriate boundaries. This energetic sovereignty is visible to others as a quality of centeredness and calm that makes you naturally attractive to be around. People feel more relaxed in your presence because they sense that you are not going to be triggered by their moods or drawn into their conflicts. This creates space for more meaningful interactions and deeper connections. The 10th and final element is transcendent purpose, connection to something larger than immediate self-interest that gives weight and meaning to your actions. This is not necessarily religious purpose, though it can be. It might be devotion to family, commitment to excellence, service to a cause, or contribution to knowledge. What matters is that your daily actions are connected to something enduring and significant. This transcendent purpose provides what psychologists call intrinsic motivation, drive that comes from internal satisfaction rather than external rewards. When you are connected to purpose larger than yourself, you become less dependent on others' approval, less vulnerable to setbacks, and more resilient in the face of criticism. Your confidence comes not from personal aggrandizement but from serving something worthy of your best efforts. Machiavelli himself found this transcendent purpose in his love for Florence and his desire to see Italy united and strong. Even in exile, even when his immediate political career was finished, he continued working toward these larger goals through his writing and analysis. This connection to something beyond himself gave his work an enduring power that purely personal ambition could never have achieved. When all 10 elements are developed and integrated, they create what observers recognize as unshakable presence, the quality that makes people pay attention when you speak, seek your opinion when they face challenges, and feel more confident in your presence than they do alone. This is not charisma in the superficial sense of charm or likability. It is magnetic authority based on genuine substance. The construction of this presence requires years of deliberate effort and cannot be rushed or shortcut. Like a master craftsman building a cathedral, you must be willing to work on elements that may not be visible in the final structure but are essential to its integrity. You must develop private disciplines that support public excellence and internal strengths that enable external influence. Most people are unwilling to make this investment because it requires sacrificing immediate gratification for long-term development. They want the results of years of preparation without doing the preparation. They want others to treat them as authorities without developing expertise. They want respect without earning it, influence without competence, confidence without capability. The man who builds unshakable presence understands that there are no shortcuts to genuine strength. Every element must be developed fully and integrated completely. Half measures produce half results, and half results in the arena of human influence are often worse than no results at all because they create the appearance of strength without its substance. But, for those willing to do the work, the rewards are extraordinary. The man with unshakable presence finds that opportunities seek him out rather than requiring him to chase them. People want to work with him, learn from him, and be associated with him. His influence extends far beyond his formal authority, and his impact outlasts his physical presence. This is the confidence that scares people not because it threatens them directly, but because it reveals the possibility of human excellence that most have never seriously considered pursuing. It demonstrates that the limitations most people accept as unchangeable are actually choices that can be unmade through sufficient will and intelligence applied consistently over time. Part 3: The weapon of weaponized invulnerability. In the final analysis, all confidence is a form of warfare against circumstances that would diminish you, against people who would control you, against forces that would make you smaller than you are capable of becoming. The man who has destroyed his weak self and constructed unshakable presence in its place possesses something that Machiavelli understood as the ultimate weapon, invulnerability that cannot be penetrated because it has already absorbed and processed every possible attack. This is not the crude invulnerability of the sociopath who feels nothing, nor the brittle invulnerability of the narcissist who cannot accept criticism. This is what might be called weaponized invulnerability, a conscious construction of psychological armor so complete that external forces cannot meaningfully damage the man who wears it, combined with the ability to use this invulnerability strategically to achieve important objectives. The development of this weapon begins with understanding that all human conflict is ultimately psychological. Physical violence, economic pressure, social ostracism, professional sabotage, all of these work by creating psychological states that cause the victim to surrender, comply, or retreat. The man who cannot be made to feel fear, shame, guilt, or desperation cannot be conquered by any conventional means. But, achieving this level of psychological invulnerability requires more than simple emotional numbness. It requires what Machiavelli called active invulnerability, not the absence of feeling but the mastery of feeling. You must be able to experience the full range of human emotions without being controlled by them. You must be able to feel fear without being paralyzed, anger without losing judgment, sadness without abandoning hope, and joy without losing vigilance. This mastery begins with a deep understanding of how emotions function and what purposes they serve. Fear signals potential danger and motivates caution, useful information that should be processed but not obeyed blindly. Anger indicates that boundaries have been violated and energy is available for action, again, useful data that should inform strategy rather than dictate behavior. Sadness suggests that something valued has been lost and attention should be paid to preventing similar losses, important feedback that should be integrated into future planning rather than wallowed in destructively. The man developing weaponized invulnerability learns to treat emotions as information rather than commands. He feels them fully, extracts whatever useful data they contain, and then chooses his response based on strategic consideration rather than emotional impulse. This creates an enormous tactical advantage because most people are predictably controlled by their emotional reactions, making their behavior easy to anticipate and influence. Consider how Cesare Borgia used this principle when facing rebellion from his subordinate commanders. Discovering their plot against him, he could have reacted with rage, fear, or desperation, all of which would have weakened his position. Instead, he processed the emotions these discoveries generated, extracted the strategic implications, and responded with calculated precision. He invited the conspirators to a meeting under the pretense of reconciliation, then had them executed simultaneously. The emotional impact of betrayal was converted into strategic advantage through disciplined processing. The second component of weaponized invulnerability is what might be called outcome independence, the ability to pursue important objectives without being attached to specific results. This seems paradoxical because it suggests caring deeply about your goals while simultaneously being prepared to lose them, but this paradox contains profound psychological power. The man who is attached to specific outcomes becomes vulnerable to anyone who can threaten those outcomes. His need for particular results makes him susceptible to blackmail, manipulation, and coercion. He can be controlled by anyone who can credibly threaten what he cannot bear to lose. This attachment creates leverage that others can use against him, making him weaker rather than stronger despite his apparent success. Outcome independence does not mean indifference to results. Rather, it means being so thoroughly prepared for any possible outcome that none of them can destabilize your psychological equilibrium. If you succeed, you extract maximum value from the success without becoming dependent on its continuation. If you fail, you extract maximum learning from the failure without being crushed by its implications. Either way, you remain in control of your own state and capable of continuing toward your larger objectives. This level of outcome independence requires extensive mental rehearsal of both success and failure scenarios. You must regularly imagine losing everything you currently have and develop specific plans for how you would rebuild. You must visualize your plans failing completely and identify the lessons such failures would teach. You must practice the emotional experience of major setbacks until they no longer have power to overwhelm your judgment. The third component is what Machiavelli observed in the most dangerous men of his era, the ability to compartmentalize completely. This means developing different psychological modes for different types of situations and maintaining clear boundaries between them. The mode you use for family relationships should be different from the mode you use for business negotiations, which should be different from the mode you use for adversarial encounters. This compartmentalization prevents emotional contamination between different areas of your life. A setback in one domain does not automatically affect your performance in other domains. An insult from one person does not make you defensive with everyone you encounter afterward. A failure in one project does not undermine your confidence in unrelated endeavors. Each situation is evaluated on its own merits and handled with the psychological tools most appropriate to it. Most people lack this ability and, therefore, suffer from what might be called emotional bleeding, allowing the mood or outcome from one interaction to influence their behavior in subsequent, unrelated interactions. They carry anger from a morning argument into afternoon business meetings. They let criticism from one person make them defensive with everyone. They allow failure in one area to create generalized feelings of inadequacy that sabotage their performance everywhere. The man with weaponized invulnerability maintains strict psychological hygiene, processing and clearing emotional residue between interactions so that each situation receives his optimal attention and capability. This requires specific techniques for emotional transition, perhaps physical rituals, mental exercises, or environmental changes that signal the shift from one mode to another. The fourth component is strategic transparency, the calculated revelation of your own thoughts, motivations, and capabilities in ways that serve your objectives rather than others' curiosity. Most people either hide everything out of insecurity or reveal everything out of naivety. Both approaches create vulnerability. The strategic approach is to control what information you share, with whom you share it, and under what circumstances. This is not about deception but about information management. The man with weaponized invulnerability understands that information is power and treats his own personal information as a strategic asset to be deployed thoughtfully rather than scattered carelessly. He reveals strength when it serves to deter opposition, vulnerability when it serves to build alliance, knowledge when it serves to demonstrate competence, and ignorance when it serves to avoid responsibility. This requires developing what intelligence professionals call operational security, constant awareness of what information you are revealing through your words, behavior, associations, and choices. You must understand that everything you do communicates something to observers and that skilled observers can extract far more information from your behavior than you might realize. Therefore, every communication becomes a conscious choice about what messages you want to send. The fifth component is what might be called tactical empathy, the ability to understand others' emotional states, motivations, and psychological patterns without being influenced by them. This is empathy as a tool for analysis rather than connection, understanding others' internal experience in order to predict and influence their behavior rather than to share their feelings. This requires developing the observer's perspective on human behavior, including your own. You learn to recognize the patterns, how different personality types react under pressure, how various motivations drive behavior, how emotional states influence decision-making. This knowledge allows you to anticipate others' responses, design interactions that achieve your objectives, and avoid being surprised by predictable human reactions. Tactical empathy also includes understanding your own psychological patterns with the same analytical clarity. You learn to recognize when you are being triggered, what specific stimuli tend to affect your judgment, and what emotional states make you vulnerable to poor decisions. This self-awareness allows you to manage your own responses strategically rather than being victimized by them. The sixth component is what Renaissance warriors called the prepared mind, mental conditioning that allows you to function effectively under extreme pressure. This goes beyond simple stress management to include active preparation for the worst-case scenarios you might face. The man with weaponized invulnerability has already lived through every possible defeat in his imagination and developed specific responses to each one. This preparation includes both practical elements, specific actions you would take if various disasters occurred, and psychological elements, the mental frameworks you would use to process and respond to extreme adversity. You must know not just what you would do if you lost your job, your health, your reputation, or your relationships, but how you would think about such losses in ways that preserve your agency and forward momentum. The prepared mind also includes what might be called disaster rehearsal, regular mental practice with extreme scenarios that builds psychological resilience before it is needed. This is not morbid obsession with negative possibilities but practical preparation for statistical realities. Most people will face major setbacks, serious illness, financial difficulties, relationship failures, or professional disasters at some point. The man with weaponized invulnerability is ready for these possibilities in ways that allow him to respond optimally when they occur. The seventh component is controlled aggression, the ability to bring tremendous force to bear when necessary while maintaining precise control over its application and timing. This is not about physical violence, though it may include that possibility. It is about the capacity for overwhelming response when your core interests are threatened, combined with the judgment to use this capacity only when strategically appropriate. Controlled aggression manifests in several forms. Intellectual aggression, the ability to dismantle opponents' arguments with surgical precision when debate becomes necessary. Social aggression, the capacity to isolate and neutralize people who threaten your relationships or reputation. Economic aggression, the willingness to use financial pressure to protect your interests when cooperation fails. Legal aggression, the preparedness to use formal systems of enforcement when informal methods prove inadequate. The key is that this aggression is controlled, deployed consciously, proportionally, and strategically rather than reactively or emotionally. The man with weaponized invulnerability does not lose his temper and lash out. Instead, he makes calculated decisions about when force is necessary and applies exactly the amount required to achieve his objectives, no more and no less. This capacity for controlled aggression serves two functions. First, it provides actual capability to defend your interests when they are genuinely threatened. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it creates what military strategists call deterrence, the reputation for effective response that prevents most challenges from occurring in the first place. When people know that attacking you will result in precise, overwhelming retaliation, most choose not to attack. The eighth component is philosophical invulnerability, grounding your identity and self-worth in principles and values that cannot be taken away by external forces. This is perhaps the deepest level of invulnerability because it makes you immune to the most sophisticated forms of psychological attack, those that attempt to undermine your sense of who you are and what you stand for. Most people derive their sense of identity from external factors: their job, their relationships, their possessions, their reputation, their achievements. All of these can be taken away, damaged, or lost, leaving the person psychologically devastated. The man with philosophical invulnerability has built his identity around internal factors: his principles, his character, his commitment to excellence, his dedication to worthy causes. This does not mean becoming indifferent to external circumstances or relationships. Rather, it means ensuring that your core sense of self remains intact regardless of what happens to your external situation. You can lose your job without losing your identity as someone committed to excellence. You can face criticism without losing your commitment to your principles. You can experience failure without losing your dedication to worthy objectives. This philosophical grounding provides what might be called existential stability, the ability to maintain meaning and purpose even when circumstances become chaotic or adverse. When you know who you are at the deepest level and that knowledge is based on unchangeable principles rather than changeable circumstances, you become psychologically unshakable. The ninth component is temporal invulnerability, independence from others' timelines and urgency. The man with weaponized invulnerability operates on his own schedule and cannot be rushed into poor decisions by artificial pressure. He understands that most attempts to create urgency are attempts to bypass careful consideration and thoughtful response. This temporal sovereignty requires developing what might be called temporal confidence, certainty that you can handle whatever consequences arise from taking the time to make good decisions. When someone demands immediate response, you provide considered response. When they create artificial deadlines, you work to your own timeline. When they attempt to pressure you through scarcity or time limits, you remain focused on making the best decision regardless of arbitrary constraints. This is not stubbornness but strategic patience. The man who controls timing often controls outcomes because he can wait for advantageous conditions while others feel compelled to act immediately. He can make decisions when he has adequate information while others make them under pressure. He can respond when he is prepared while others must react before they are ready. The 10th and final component is what Machiavelli recognized as the ultimate expression of power, the ability to remain merciful from a position of strength rather than weakness. The man with weaponized invulnerability can afford to be generous because his generosity comes from choice rather than necessity. He can forgive because he does not need forgiveness. He can be patient because he is not dependent on others' approval or compliance. This mercy from strength is perhaps the most psychologically intimidating quality a person can possess because it demonstrates complete mastery of the situation. When someone attacks you and you respond not with retaliation but with controlled benevolence, it reveals a level of power that makes further attack seem futile. The person who can afford to be merciful when he could choose to be ruthless displays a form of strength that is both attractive and terrifying. This quality also serves practical purposes. Mercy from strength often converts enemies into allies more effectively than victory through force. When you demonstrate that you could destroy someone but choose not to, you often earn more loyalty than if you had simply defeated them. People who experience your strength tempered by choice often become advocates rather than adversaries. But this mercy must be genuine, based in actual capability for effective response rather than weakness disguised as virtue. False mercy is quickly recognized and invites further attack. True mercy from strength, however, often ends conflicts more completely than victory through force because it addresses the psychological rather than merely the tactical aspects of the confrontation. When all 10 components of weaponized invulnerability are developed and integrated, they create what observers recognize as an almost supernatural level of confidence, the quality that makes people step back and reassess their assumptions about what is possible for human beings to achieve. This is not arrogance or aggression but rather the calm certainty of someone who has prepared so thoroughly that he has become genuinely dangerous to oppose and valuable to support. This weaponized invulnerability serves as both shield and sword. As shield, it protects you from the emotional manipulation, social pressure, and psychological warfare that others use to control behavior. As sword, it allows you to pursue objectives that require exceptional persistence, courage, and independence. You become immune to the forces that stop most people and capable of achievements that most people consider impossible. The man who possesses this weapon finds that others recognize its presence even when he never displays it overtly. There is something in his bearing, his speech patterns, his response to pressure that signals to experienced observers that they are dealing with someone operating on a different level. This recognition often eliminates the need to use the weapon because people choose cooperation over confrontation when they sense they are outmatched. This is the confidence that truly scares people, not because it threatens them with harm but because it demonstrates possibilities for human development that make their own limitations seem chosen rather than inevitable. In the presence of genuine invulnerability, others' excuses for weakness become transparent, their complaints about circumstances become meaningless, and their acceptance of mediocrity becomes obviously unnecessary. The development of weaponized invulnerability is not a project to be completed but a practice to be maintained throughout life. Like physical fitness, it requires constant attention and regular exercise to maintain peak condition. The moment you become complacent about your psychological defenses is the moment they begin to deteriorate. The man who would remain invulnerable must continue growing, learning, and adapting throughout his life. But, for those who commit to this path, the rewards extend far beyond personal advantage. The man who has mastered himself becomes capable of helping others master themselves. The strength he has developed through destroying his weak self becomes available to protect and guide those who have not yet found the courage to begin their own transformation. In this way, individual invulnerability becomes collective strength, and personal confidence becomes social leadership. This is perhaps Machiavelli's greatest insight, that the man who conquers himself becomes capable of conquering anything else that matters. Not through force or manipulation, but through the irresistible power of demonstrated possibility. When others see what can be achieved through disciplined development of human potential, they often choose to follow rather than resist, to learn rather than oppose, to aspire rather than undermine. The confident man who has destroyed his weak self and constructed invulnerable strength in its place becomes a force of nature in human form, predictable in his principles, unpredictable in his capabilities, and utterly committed to objectives worthy of his considerable powers. This is the confidence that shapes history, builds institutions, and inspires others to achieve excellence they never thought possible. In the end, the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others because he has already survived the only destruction that truly matters, the death of illusions, the collapse of false securities, and the abandonment of comfortable limitations. What remains after this destruction is not diminished but purified, not weakened but strengthened, not less human but more human than most dare to become. This is the legacy that Machiavelli intended and the challenge he presents to every man who encounters his work, to stop accepting the weaknesses that diminish you, to stop tolerating the circumstances that constrain you, and to stop making excuses for the excellence that lies dormant within you. The choice, as always, remains yours, but now you understand what is possible for those who choose strength over comfort, reality over illusion, and excellence over mediocrity. The man who makes this choice discovers that confidence is not something he has but something he is, not a feeling he experiences but a reality he embodies, not a trait he possesses but a truth he has become. This transformation is available to anyone willing to pay its price, but the price is everything you currently are in exchange for everything you could become. Most people, when they understand this bargain fully, choose to remain as they are. A few, however, recognize it as the greatest opportunity life offers and embrace it completely. These few become the men who shape the world according to their vision, who create rather than merely consume, who lead rather than simply follow, and who inspire others to discover their own capacity for greatness. They become living proof that human potential is far greater than most people ever dare to explore, and their example serves as both invitation and challenge to those who encounter them. This is why true confidence scares people, and why it should. It reveals the vast distance between what most people accept as their limitations and what they could actually achieve if they found the courage to destroy their weak selves and construct something magnificent in their place. In the presence of such men, excuses become impossible, mediocrity becomes unbearable, and excellence becomes the only acceptable standard. The choice, ultimately, is simple: remain as you are and accept the limitations that choice imposes, or begin the work of destroying your weak self and discovering what lies beyond the boundaries of your current imagination. Machiavelli's challenge echoes across the centuries, as relevant today as it was 500 years ago. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, but only such a man ever discovers what it truly means to be invincible.